Hello and welcome to the Scrum Facilitators Community Podcast. I'm back again with Fredrik Wendt, and this is a special thing because we're doing a really short, maybe a bit of Scrum nerdery thing, but a short thing that's separate of the longer podcast. So if you're listening to this or watching this and think, who's Fredrik? Well, you can just check out the podcast we already released, and there's a nice introduction and some other interesting topics that we won't get into now. So what are we here for? Fredrik said to me, well, I have this interesting thing about the commitments in Scrum. They're in the Scrum Guide since 2020. It's the product goal, the sprint goal, and the definition of done. Those are commitments in terms of the Scrum Guide. So I'm very curious where this goes, and we'll see if we can make you think a bit or give you new insights and learn something for ourselves as well. So Fredrik, please tell us why this topic and then take us along.
So like you said, there was a change in the 2020 version where they introduced this concept that every artifact has a commitment attached to it, right? And so when I started thinking about that change and whether I supported that or not, I'm going to draw here for the people that are watching, but to me, those commitments are different in nature, right? So we have, the product backlog. I'm going to use PBL here,
Yes.
as we all know, and it says the items on this artifact are supposed to take us closer to the product goal, right? So that's the commitment for the product backlog, and then we have the sprint backlog. And this one again, whatever we do here and however you use this tool is supposed to help us, move closer to the sprint goal, to help us realize this sprint goal. Yes. And I should say the same thing for the product backlog. It's something that moves us towards, this value that we want to see. Every sprint is an investment, roughly 50,000 euros. If you haven't calculated this, go ahead and do that. But that's what most Scrum teams cost per sprint. So Scrum Guide and Scrum has often said, it's not enough just to go in and do random stuff in the sprint, right? You should know why you are investing this much money.
Yes.
What's the outcome? And that is the why question of sprint planning, right? Why are we investing this 50,000 euros? And so we want to formulate that into the sprint goal so that we have a clear outcome that we're trying to achieve, an impact, a change, a value change, ideally. And then we have this thing called the increment, the third artifact in Scrum. So we have product backlog, sprint backlog, and the increment. And so the Scrum Guide says the commitment for the increment is called the definition of done.
Sure.
Previously, this used to tell us when our increment is potentially releasable. When it's ready to go, when it's really, we think we're done, there's no more work to be done, this can be released now and be of value to the consumer, whoever that is, right?
Yeah.
And so the question is now, is the increment going to help us get to the definition of done? These arrows that I drawn to the left, the product backlog items, are they helping us achieving the product goal? Well, yeah. And the items on the sprint backlog, yeah. But the increment, well, what? Not something happened here.
Yes.
Because the definition of done tells us when we have an increment.
Yes. So this is interesting.
This changed for me, right? Because I'm just going to say one more thing, Sjoerd. And
Cool.
The items on the left here, the product backlog and the sprint backlogs, they are essentially plans, right? Mm-hmm. It's a plan on how to get to a new state, how to get something to happen, how to have a change in value, how to have a change in impact on the market or something like that. Your users, of course. So both of these, there are plans, but the definition of done is not a plan. The increment is not a plan. Mm-hmm. The increment artifact, that is an actual output, right? That is the thing we have, the thing we produced. Whereas the sprint backlog and the product backlog, those are plans. Yes. So these are, very different types of artifacts. Aspirations, whereas the increment, that's an output. It's a result.
Yes.
And so for me, now this makes it a bit strange now, since the product goal obviously is also an aspiration. We want to get there, but we don't know if it's the right goal. We might change it. Same thing for the sprint goal. We strive towards it, but we don't promise that we get there. We promise we're going to try to get there, right? But when it comes to the definition of done, we don't say, well, this is the best. We hope we're going to get there. It might be wrong. No. This is something we say, this is the quality we need. We agreed on this. We're not going to budge. I'm not going to say done unless it meets the definition of done, right? So this is actually a promise, whereas the sprint goal and the product goal, they're not a promise in the same way. Does that make sense to you?
It does, and so there's a clear difference, I think. You're correct in that. So, and if we talk about definition of done, especially for teams that are not at that stage that you mentioned, like done is releasable, there's no remaining work, or done can even be released for some teams, or even data has been gathered to see if the change has the desired impact. That can all be part of the definition of done. But I think the interesting thing here is that for teams that are not there yet, they don't have that like really ambitious, I would say, definition of done that actually Scrum desires. To raise the transparency. You have this part, and that's what we call in trainings the definition of undone, like the stuff that you want to do, but is not yet attainable for this team to add to the definition of done, because they have like dependencies. There's regulations that they cannot release themselves, or other stuff. I don't know. There's always this part. And I think that part is actually more like a sprint goal or a product goal than the definition of done itself, because that is an aspiration, right? That is the remaining part that we want to get into our definition of done. So there's an interesting thing. Another thing I would like to highlight, and it's if you look at it less strict, then we have like 3 artifacts, 3 things that are supposed to raise transparency. So product backlog raises transparency to our plans for the future. Sprint backlog raises transparency to our current plans. And the increment is supposed to raise transparency with regard to current value. You can measure something there. And the commitments, they are... You could also see them less strict as guides for this plan. Like we have a plan, and the product goal guides us what we should focus this plan on. Sprint goal guides us what we should focus the sprint backlog on.
Like a North Star or a compass. Absolutely.
Yeah, and the definition of done is actually a guide in terms of quality, in terms of how much we should do or have done to get an increment. So if you look at it that way, it makes more sense, I think. However, this lumps in the definition of done and the increment, the aspirational increment, with the sprint backlog and the sprint goal again. Because when you talk about aspirational, about what do we have to do to get to the next increment, you're talking about sprint backlog plan again. So Can I add to that?
Yeah. Because you talked about transparency, right? And transparency is the notion of knowing where we are, right?
Yes.
If we don't know where we are, what's done, what's not done, we don't have transparency. Because there's no longer a shared understanding of what do we think is done, what have we done, etc., or where do we need to go. So unless we have a shared understanding, I would say we don't have transparency. And so that's the thing with the definition of done. If we start taking shortcuts and not always adhering to the definition of done, we lose transparency, right? Sure. Whereas if we don't achieve the sprint goal, that doesn't mean transparency is lost.
It's actually gained, probably. If we do it right, it's probably gaining transparency. Okay. I understand. That's the difference.
The definition of done, really, if not followed, you lose transparency, whether the other ones are, they're not the same kind of beast, is what I'm saying, right? Those are different things. And this is why
I do agree. So your argument is very clear. And I'm trying also to step into the shoes of Ken and Jeff a bit and think, okay, why would they put those in the same boat, right? In the same string of commitments. And I think it's also something to do with, in previous Scrum guides, there was more, we didn't have the product goal. We didn't have this notion of commitments as a category that's attached to the artifacts. But we did talk about, we do commit to the sprint goal, and we do commit to the definition of done. So I think it stems from there. And it is unfortunate. But yeah, there is a reason for it, of course. And the thing is, so with your insight in that there's a difference, do you have suggestions? Like, would you change the guide, or how would you present this differently?
That's for another session, I think. It's for a longer talk.
Good escape.
Yeah, I think that's the best I can come up with right now. For me, this is important to highlight for people. I love the idea that we have a definition of done, because this is what brings transparency on where the current state of the product is, right? And that's often been a problem in our industry, in the software industry at least, right? It's been unclear. It works on my machine, it works on that machine, but not in that environment, not for those customers, whatever it is, all of those uncertainties, we've tried to wash them away because they impact decision making. It's really hard to get good decisions from people if they don't understand where we are. So for me, this commitment here, the definition of done, is crucial in getting the empiric process control to really work well, right? Because if we don't have a known now state, there's no way to compare that to the wanted state. Yes. And so for me, this is the key. And I love being able to formulate what's the outcome. Why are we investing this much money, right? The product goal, that's for another session as well if you want to. But I'm not such a big fan of that one, because it's kind of dumbing everything down to one thing. And I'm not sure that's the right thing.
So let's do another session soon on that and see where we get in another 10 minutes, because that's where we are at now. So for the listeners and viewers, this is like an experiment, right? So we're trying to do very brief, but detailed investigation of a thing.
Deep dive.
A deep dive. And we try to keep it short. So I'm very glad that you said, let's go into that another time, because we will probably sometime. And I hope we continue this conversation some other day. But for now, I think let's see what our editor makes of this. Yeah. And if you have any questions, if you saw this or listened to this, have any questions, feel free to reach out to me or Fredrik through LinkedIn. You can find us. Just ask a comment or whatever on the place you find this video or this podcast, and we will try to see that and respond to it. Maybe do a next video based on comments or questions. We'll see. So thank you for listening. Thank you for presenting and challenging the Scrum Guide. That's always fun, and we'll see where it goes. Thank you, Fredrik.
Thank you. Nice talking to you.